He was not supposed to hear a baby crying in a place where even grown men learn to whisper. The fog sat low over the abandoned rail yard outside Wilmington, North Carolina, turning the rusted tracks silver and the weeds pale as bone. It was just after 5 o'clock in the morning, that hour before sunrise when the world feels unfinished, when every sound travels farther than it should. A thin winter mist drifted between the old freight containers, carrying the smell of wet iron, pine needles, and distant salt from the Cape Fear River. Captain Ethan Walker had taken the long road home that morning, not because it was faster, but because quiet roads asked fewer questions. He was 37 years old, a United States Marine with broad shoulders, close-cropped brown hair, and a face shaped by weather, discipline, and things he never said out loud. His skin was fair, roughened by sun and wind, and a faint line near his left eyebrow caught the gray light whenever he turned his head. His eyes were blue, steady, tired, the kind of eyes that had learned to scan a room before trusting it. Beside him in the passenger seat sat Shadow, a 6-year-old German shepherd with a black and tan coat and amber eyes that seemed to hold their own small lanterns. Shadow had been trained to notice what people missed. A change in breath, a shift in silence, the trembling note beneath an ordinary sound. Ethan had seen that gift save men overseas, and after they both came home, he had watched it save him in quieter ways. A paw against his knee during the long nights. A low breath beside the bed when memory got too loud. A warm body at the door, guarding him from ghosts no one else could see. That morning, Shadow lifted his head before Ethan heard anything. His ears went sharp. His body went still. Ethan eased his foot off the gas, the old pickup rolling past a chain-link fence bent open near the service road. "What is it, boy?" he murmured. Shadow did not bark. He stared through the windshield toward the rail yard, nose working, breath short and focused. Then it came. Faint, thin, almost swallowed by the fog. A cry. Ethan froze, one hand on the wheel, the other moving instinctively toward the dog tags beneath his jacket. For a moment, he thought it was a bird or wind sliding through broken metal. Then the sound came again, softer this time, small enough to break something inside him. Shadow let out a low whine, not fear, not warning, but urgency. Ethan pulled to the shoulder, killed the engine, and the sudden silence felt enormous. The world narrowed to fog, gravel, and that fragile cry. He stepped out into the cold, boots crunching on wet stones, and Shadow leapt down beside him without waiting for command. The shepherd moved ahead, slow and deliberate, tail level, ears forward, each paw placed with care. Ethan followed, one hand raised slightly, as if even the air might bruise what they were approaching. Beyond the fence, the rail yard opened into rows of forgotten freight cars and stacks of wooden pallets dark with rain. Weeds brushed Ethan's knees. Drops of mist clung to Shadow's whiskers. Somewhere nearby, a loose sheet of metal tapped gently against a post. Tap, 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 like a nervous heartbeat. Then Shadow stopped. Not in front of a threat. In front of a miracle that had been left with no witness. Beneath the overhang of an old storage platform, tucked beside a folded blue blanket and a torn cardboard box, lay an infant. The baby was wrapped in a small gray sweatshirt, cheeks pink from the cold, tiny fists curled close to the chest. Shadow stood over the child, not touching, not crowding, but guarding with a stillness so complete that Ethan felt his own breath catch. The dog lowered his head and gave one soft, careful sniff. The baby's cry faded into a whimper. Ethan dropped to one knee, the wet gravel soaking through his jeans. "Hey, little one," he whispered, his voice rougher than he expected. "You're not alone anymore." He looked around, searching the fog, the tracks, the silent buildings, hoping for movement, for a mother, for anyone. Nothing answered but the distant river wind. Shadow shifted one step closer to the infant, placing his body between the child and the open yard. Ethan saw the gesture and understood it as clearly as any spoken order. Protect. Stay. Do not leave. His hand trembled as he took off his field jacket and folded it around the baby, careful not to move too fast. The infant stirred, one tiny hand slipping free, fingers brushing the edge of Shadow's fur. The German shepherd did not flinch. His amber eyes softened. Ethan had seen Shadow face smoke, storms, and screaming machines without blinking. But this was different. The dog bent his head lower, almost reverent, as if he knew the difference between guarding a life and witnessing grace. Ethan pulled out his phone. No service. He stepped 2 feet left, then 3, raising it into the fog. Still nothing. A quiet pressure filled his chest, the old Marine instinct waking beneath the ache. Assess. Shelter. Signal. Move only if safe. He looked down at the baby again and saw the small rise and fall of breathing beneath the jacket. Weak, but steady. Stay with us, he whispered. Just stay with us. Shadow gave a soft sound from deep in his chest, almost like a promise. Then, from somewhere beyond the freight cars, a second noise slipped through the mist. Not a cry this time. A faint clatter. Ethan looked up. Shadow's ears snapped forward. The fog seemed to hold its breath. And in that suspended gray dawn, with an abandoned child wrapped in his jacket and a German shepherd standing guard like an angel made of fur and bone, Captain Ethan Walker realized this was not just a rescue. It was the beginning of something he had not prayed for, but somehow had been sent. The clatter came again, softer now, somewhere behind the line of rusted freight cars where the fog thickened into a wall. Ethan did not move at first. He stayed on one knee beside the infant, one hand resting lightly over the field jacket that now held in what little warmth the child had. Shadow stood between them and the open yard, head low, shoulders squared, his breath leaving him in pale clouds. Nothing about him was frantic. That was what worried Ethan most. Shadow only became that still when he was listening to something deeper than sound. Ethan slowly reached into his pocket and pulled out a small flashlight, shielding the beam with his fingers so it would not startle the baby. The light cut a narrow path across wet gravel, broken pallets, and the side of an old boxcar streaked with brown rain lines. No one appeared. No footsteps. No voice calling for a lost child. Just the distant groan of metal cooling in the morning air and the thin whisper of weeds moving against the tracks. Easy, Ethan breathed, though he was not sure whether he meant it for the dog, the baby, or himself. The infant stirred under the jacket, mouth opening in a tired cry that barely found strength. Ethan looked down and felt that sound pass straight through him. It was too small for such a big world, too honest for a place abandoned by daylight and mercy. He slid one hand beneath the baby with the care of a man lifting something sacred, supporting the head the way he remembered from long ago hospital visits with friends and family. The child was lighter than he expected, a bundle of breath, cloth, and trust. Shadow turned his head just enough to watch the movement, then looked back into the fog. Ethan tucked the baby against his chest, inside the open front of his jacket, letting his own body heat wrap around the small frame. "I have got you," he whispered. "I have got you now." The words surprised him. They sounded less like comfort and more like a vow. He took 3 slow steps backward toward the fence, then stopped. Shadow did not follow. The German shepherd remained beside the storage platform, nose lowered to the blue blanket. He sniffed the ground, then the torn cardboard box, then lifted his head toward a narrow gap between 2 freight cars. Ethan knew that look. It was not curiosity. It was a message. There was more. He adjusted the infant carefully against his chest and scanned the area. The phone still showed no service. The pickup was maybe 80 yards behind him, beyond the fence, but the nearest clear road with reception could be a quarter mile or more. Every choice seemed to cost something. Leave the yard too quickly and miss a clue. Stay too long and risk the child getting colder. The old training inside him tried to make a clean order out of fear. First warmth, then signal, then help. But Shadow took 1 step toward the gap and looked back, amber eyes fixed on Ethan. Not pleading, insisting. "Shadow," Ethan said softly, "not now." The dog did not move. A faint sound slipped through the fog again. Not a clatter this time. A breathless little whimper, so faint Ethan almost believed his mind had made it. Shadow heard it. His ears angled forward, then relaxed for a single heartbeat, as if the sound confirmed what he already knew. Ethan felt the baby move against him, a tiny fist pressing into the fabric of his shirt. The touch was small, but it anchored him. He stepped after Shadow. They passed between the freight cars, the metal walls rising on either side like the sides of a canyon. The air smelled colder there, trapped and damp, with hints of mildew and old engine oil. Ethan kept the flashlight low. He spoke under his breath, calm and steady, because panic had a way of making bad places worse. "All right, boy. Show me." Shadow moved slowly, careful not to pull too far ahead. At the end of the gap was a service shed with one broken window, its door hanging crooked on rusted hinges. A strip of faded yellow caution tape fluttered from a nail. Beneath it, on the muddy ground, were footprints. Small adult footprints. Recent. The rain had softened the edges, but not erased them. Ethan crouched as much as he could while keeping the infant secure. Beside one print lay a hospital bracelet, damp and twisted, the name line smeared until it was unreadable. His chest tightened. He did not need the whole story to feel the weight of it. Someone had been afraid. Someone had come here in desperation. Someone had left more questions than answers in the cold. Shadow stepped inside the shed and gave one low, gentle whine. Ethan followed to the doorway, not entering fully. The flashlight beam found a second blanket, a half-empty bottle of water, and a small canvas diaper bag set neatly against the wall. No one was there. But on top of the bag rested a folded note, weighed down by a smooth white stone. Ethan stared at it. His hand did not reach for it right away. The baby breathed against his chest, warmer now, still weak but present. Shadow sat beside the bag, not touching the note, guarding it the way he had guarded the child. Ethan finally lifted the paper with 2 fingers. The writing had blurred at the edges, but a few words remained clear enough to hurt. Please keep him safe. I had nowhere else. Ethan closed his eyes for 1 second. Not long. Just enough to let the sorrow pass through without swallowing him. When he opened them, the first pale stripe of sunrise had begun to touch the broken window, turning the fog outside from gray to silver. His phone vibrated once in his pocket. 1 bar. Barely there. Enough. Ethan dialed emergency services with his thumb while holding the infant close, and when the operator answered, his voice came out low, controlled, and full of something he had not felt in a long time. Purpose. The operator's voice came through thin and broken, riding on a single bar of signal like a candle in wind. Ethan stood in the doorway of the service shed with the infant pressed close beneath his jacket, Shadow seated at his side, and the folded note tucked carefully into his chest pocket. "This is Captain Ethan Walker, United States Marine Corps," he said, each word steady because the child needed steadiness, because fear could wait until later. "I am at the old Seaboard Rail Yard off Riverbend Service Road, near the north fence. I have found an infant alive, cold, breathing, and in need of immediate medical care." Static answered first. Then the operator returned, calmer now, asking questions in the practiced rhythm of someone trained to build a bridge across panic. Ethan gave every detail he could see. Approximate age, condition, clothing, location, no visible injury, weak cry, responsive to warmth. He described the note and the diaper bag without touching anything else. He did not guess at what he did not know. He had learned long ago that guesses could become ghosts. When the operator told him to stay on the line, Ethan stepped back toward the open yard, searching for a clearer signal. The fog had begun to loosen around the freight cars. Dawn pressed pale gold along the edges of broken metal and wet weeds. The rail yard, which only minutes ago had felt abandoned by the whole world, now seemed to be holding its breath with him. Shadow followed close, but not too close, his body angled outward as if he understood there was still a perimeter to keep. The infant made a faint sound against Ethan's chest, not quite a cry, more like a question. Ethan lowered his chin and breathed warm air toward the little face. "Help is coming," he whispered. "You hear me, buddy? Help is coming." The word buddy slipped out before he could stop it, simple and human and almost unbearably gentle. He thought of his younger brother's son back in Virginia, all round cheeks and sleepy fists, and the way babies trusted the arms that held them without asking whether those arms deserved trust. That was the sacred weight of it. They arrived believing the world would catch them. And sometimes the world failed. But not today. Not if Ethan could stand. Not if Shadow could guard. A distant siren finally rose somewhere beyond the road, faint at first, then fuller, threading through the fog like a hymn with red lights behind it. Shadow lifted his head. Ethan felt the dog's attention sharpen, then settle. Friendly. Approaching. Safe enough. Moments later, tires crunched beyond the fence, doors opened, and voices moved through the mist. A sheriff's deputy reached them first, a broad man in a tan jacket with a kind, careful face and silver at his temples. Behind him came 2 paramedics carrying a medical bag and a thermal blanket. "Captain Walker," the deputy called. "Here," Ethan answered, stepping into view. His voice was calm, but his arms tightened for half a second before he let the paramedic approach. The woman in navy blue gloves slowed when she saw Shadow. The shepherd stood firm, not aggressive, simply certain. Ethan touched 2 fingers to Shadow's head. "Stand down, boy. They are here to help." Shadow looked up at him, then lowered himself into a sit. The paramedic's expression softened. "Good dog," she murmured and moved closer. Her name tag read Melissa Grant. She had red hair tucked beneath a knit cap and eyes that had seen many emergency mornings. But even she paused when she pulled back the jacket and saw the child blink against the cold light. "Oh, sweet baby," she whispered. Not loud, not dramatic, just a small sentence full of ache. She checked the infant's breathing, pulse, temperature, and wrapped him in the silver thermal blanket that crackled softly in the quiet. Ethan watched every movement, his jaw tight. He wanted to help, but the hardest order in the world was sometimes to stand still. The baby's fingers curled once around the edge of Ethan's sleeve before Melissa lifted him into her arms. That tiny grip almost undid him. Ethan held it together by looking at Shadow. The dog had not moved. His amber eyes stayed on the child, and his ears dipped slightly, as if some part of him understood that handing someone over could be its own kind of bravery. Deputy Harris stepped beside Ethan, notebook in hand, but voice gentle. "You found him alone?" Ethan nodded. Shadow heard him first. The deputy glanced at the German shepherd, then at the shed. "Your dog led you to the note?" "Yes." Ethan removed the folded paper from his pocket and offered it carefully. "I handled it before I thought about evidence. The baby was my priority." Harris took it in a clean evidence sleeve from his kit and nodded. "I would have done the same." The words helped more than they should have. Across the yard, Melissa worked with her partner inside the ambulance, warming the infant slowly, speaking in soft tones. The baby cried then, stronger than before. Not peaceful, not pretty, but alive. The sound cut through the rail yard and changed the air. Ethan closed his eyes for one breath, and Shadow gave a low, almost relieved whine. "That is right," Ethan whispered. "You brought him back to the world." Then, from behind the service shed, Shadow suddenly turned. His body stiffened, but his growl did not come. Instead, he walked toward a patch of weeds beside the rear wall and lowered his nose. Ethan followed with Deputy Harris a few steps behind. There, half hidden beneath a piece of damp canvas, lay a small stuffed bear, clean except for mud on one paw. Around its neck was tied a white hospital ribbon. Ethan crouched and looked at it without touching. The name printed on the ribbon was still readable. "Noah." The deputy exhaled softly. "We have a name." Ethan looked back toward the ambulance, where the child's cry had become steady, loud, wonderfully stubborn. The sunrise broke a little wider over the rail yard then, lighting the fog from within. For the first time that morning, Ethan felt the cold give way to something else. Not answers. Not yet. But enough light to begin. The name changed the morning. Before that, the infant had been a fragile life wrapped in silver and breath, a child rescued from cold gravel and unanswered questions. But once Deputy Harris said Noah, the rail yard seemed to grow quieter around them, as if even the rusted freight cars understood that a name was not a small thing. A name meant someone had once held him close enough to choose it. A name meant there was a story before the fog, before the service shed, before Shadow's amber eyes found what the world had nearly missed. Ethan stood near the ambulance doors as Melissa Grant secured the thermal blanket around the baby and checked the tiny knit cap one more time. Noah's cry had softened now into a tired fuss, the stubborn kind that made Melissa smile through the worry in her face. "His temperature is coming up," she said. "Still low, but better than I expected." Ethan nodded, but his eyes stayed on the child. The sound of the ambulance heater hummed under the morning air, mixing with radio chatter, the soft click of medical equipment, and Shadow's steady breathing beside his leg. Deputy Harris stepped closer with the stuffed bear sealed safely in an evidence bag. The white ribbon around its neck carried the printed name Noah Ellis, and beneath it, a date of birth only 6 weeks earlier. Harris's expression remained professional, but something gentle flickered behind his eyes. "We will run the name through the hospital systems and missing child reports," he said. "Could be fast. Could take a little while." Ethan looked toward the service shed. The blue blanket. The note. The water bottle. The careful way the diaper bag had been set upright. Not thrown, not forgotten, but placed as though the person leaving it had been trying to make one impossible choice less cruel. Whoever left him wanted him found, Ethan said quietly. Harris did not answer right away. The deputy followed Ethan's gaze across the yard, where pale sunlight now touched the broken window of the shed. Maybe, he said, and maybe they were out of options. The words settled between them without judgment. Ethan appreciated that. He had seen what judgment did to people already hanging by a thread. It pushed them farther into the dark. Shadow suddenly lifted his head and looked toward the ambulance. Noah had stopped crying. Not sleeping exactly. Listening. His tiny face turned toward the open door, toward the shape of the German shepherd standing in the cold. Melissa noticed it too. He knows that dog, she murmured. Ethan felt a quiet pull in his chest. Shadow was with him before I was. The paramedic hesitated, then looked at Deputy Harris, who gave a small nod. Melissa lowered the baby just slightly, still safe in her arms, still wrapped and warm. Shadow stepped forward only when Ethan gave him a soft command. Easy. The shepherd approached with a reverence that made everyone nearby fall silent. No barking. No excitement. He stretched his neck and stopped inches away, warm breath barely stirring the edge of the blanket. Noah blinked. One tiny hand lifted, slow and unsteady, and brushed against Shadow's muzzle. The dog closed his eyes, just for a second, and Ethan, who had walked through enough hard mornings to stop expecting beauty from the world, felt something inside him loosen. It was not dramatic. No thunder. No choir. Just a child warm enough to reach, and a dog gentle enough to receive it. Sometimes grace did not arrive with light from the clouds. Sometimes it came with a wet nose, a steady paw, and silence deep enough to heal what words could not. The ambulance was ready to leave minutes later. Melissa told Ethan that Noah would be taken to New Hanover Regional Medical Center, that Child Protective Services would meet them there, that the doctors would check him fully and keep him warm. Ethan understood every sentence, but some part of him resisted the sight of the doors closing. Shadow resisted too. He stood firm on the gravel, eyes locked on Noah, body tense with a question he could not speak. Ethan laid a hand on his neck. Let them help him, he whispered. We did our part. But even as he said it, he knew it was not true. Not completely. Something had begun here. That would not end when the siren faded. The ambulance pulled away slowly through the open fence, red lights painting the fog in soft pulses. Shadow took 2 steps after it, then stopped when Ethan called his name. The shepherd looked back, and for the first time that morning, his face carried confusion. Not disobedience. Not fear. Loss. Ethan had seen that look before, after helicopters lifted off, after hospital doors closed, after people disappeared into places where loyalty could not follow. He knelt beside Shadow and gripped the thick fur at his shoulders. I know, he said. I feel it too. Deputy Harris waited a respectful distance away, then cleared his throat. Captain, I may need you to come down later for a full statement. Ethan stood. I will. And the dog, Harris added, almost apologetically. He is part of this. Ethan looked at Shadow. The shepherd's nose was still pointed toward the road where the ambulance had vanished. He is the reason there is a this. Harris nodded, and something like respect passed between the two men. By the time Ethan returned to his pickup, the sun had climbed above the rail yard, turning the wet tracks bright as wire. He opened the passenger door, but Shadow did not jump in. The dog stood beside the seat, looking back once more. Ethan followed his gaze to the platform where Noah had been found. The blue blanket was gone now, taken as evidence. The gravel was marked with footprints. The fog was thinning, but the place still felt occupied by the echo of a cry, the weight of a note, the warmth of a life that had nearly slipped away unnoticed. Ethan reached into his jacket and found, caught in the fabric near his zipper, one tiny gray thread from Noah's sweatshirt. He held it between his fingers, almost nothing at all. Then Shadow placed his paw on the running board and climbed into the truck. Ethan closed the door gently, walked around to the driver's side, and sat behind the wheel without starting the engine. For a long moment, he simply listened to the quiet. Then his phone buzzed. A number he did not recognize. He answered. Deputy Harris's voice came through, lower than before. Captain Walker, he said, we found a match for Noah Ellis. Ethan's hand tightened around the phone. Shadow turned toward him. Is he going to be all right? Ethan asked. Harris paused. The baby is stable. But there is something else you need to know. The morning light filled the windshield, bright and clean, while the words on the other end opened a door Ethan had not known was there. The line stayed quiet for one breath too long. Ethan sat behind the wheel with the phone pressed to his ear, the old pickup still parked beside the broken fence, morning lights spilling across the dashboard in pale sheets. Shadow watched him from the passenger seat, ears forward, eyes bright with the same question Ethan could not ask fast enough. Deputy Harris finally spoke, his voice careful, as if he knew every word would land with weight. Noah Ellis was born at New Hanover 6 weeks ago. His mother is listed as Hannah Ellis, 24 years old. No current address. No family contact except one emergency number that is disconnected. Ethan looked out toward the rail yard, where officers were moving slowly around the service shed, photographing the ground, collecting what the fog had tried to hide. Was there a missing child report? No, Harris said. Not yet. Ethan closed his eyes. That answer hurt in a way he had not expected. Not because it solved anything, but because it did not. A child could vanish into the cold for hours, and the world might not even know to start looking. There is more, Harris continued. Hospital records show Hannah came in twice after Noah was born asking for help. Social worker notes mention housing instability, no transportation, and concern about postpartum depression. Last recorded contact was 5 days ago. Ethan opened his eyes. The rail yard blurred for a second, not from tears, not quite, but from the ache of a story becoming human. Hannah, young, alone, reaching for help in a country full of locked doors and busy phones. He imagined her carrying Noah through the fog, choosing the storage platform because it had a roof, placing the diaper bag upright, tying the bear with his name, writing a note with hands that must have been shaking. Please keep him safe. I had nowhere else. Do you think she is nearby? Ethan asked. We do not know, Harris said. But we are looking. We need to treat this as a welfare concern for both of them. Ethan turned the key just enough for the dashboard to glow, but he did not start the engine. Shadow whined low, nose pressing toward the half-open window, drawing in the air as if the morning still had something to tell him. Ethan looked at the dog. What is it? Shadow did not bark. He turned his head toward the road beyond the rail yard, then back to Ethan. It was the same insistence from the service shed. Not panic. Direction. Ethan spoke into the phone. Deputy, Shadow may have picked up another scent. Harris paused. Can he track? He is retired from military work, but yes, he can track. Another pause, then Harris's voice changed, sharpened by purpose. Do not go alone. I am coming back to you. Ethan looked at the dog, at the fog thinning over the roadside ditch, at the tire tracks leading toward the tree line beyond the service road. Waiting made sense. Waiting was protocol. Waiting was safe. But Shadow was already shifting in his seat, a living compass pointed toward something unseen. I will stay near the truck, Ethan said, and opened the door. He did not run. He moved with measured care, because this was not a chase. This was a search for someone who might be more lost than guilty. Shadow jumped down and lowered his nose to the gravel near the fence, circling once, twice, then catching a line that pulled him toward the drainage path running parallel to Riverbend Service Road. Ethan followed, phone still in hand, Harris on the line, the truck behind him, the rail yard to his left. The drainage path was soft from the night's mist, marked by weeds, soda cans, and the faint prints of worn sneakers. Small, adult, unsteady in places. Ethan described what he saw, keeping his voice low. After 50 yards, the path dipped beneath a stand of loblolly pines, where the light became green and dim. Shadow stopped near a fallen branch. Something pale had snagged on the bark. A strip of cloth from a sweatshirt, damp with dew. Ethan crouched without touching it. We have a possible clothing fragment, he told Harris. Shadow sniffed the air and pressed forward again. The path curved toward an old bus shelter on a county road that had not seen regular service in years. Its glass panels were cloudy with salt and age. Inside, on the bench, sat a paper grocery bag, folded neatly at the top. Ethan approached slowly. Hannah, he called, not loud, not commanding. My name is Ethan. I found Noah. He is safe. He is warm. People are helping him. The words disappeared into the trees. No answer came. Shadow stepped into the shelter and sniffed the bench. Beneath it lay a small knit mitten, the size of a woman's hand, and beside it, a printed hospital discharge sheet folded into quarters. Ethan felt the cold lift along the back of his neck. This was not a trail made by someone trying to disappear forever. This was a trail made by someone too tired to keep carrying everything. Sirens approached behind him, distant but closing. Deputy Harris arrived in his cruiser 2 minutes later, stepping out with one hand raised gently, as if to say he understood the fragility of the moment. He bagged the cloth and the papers, then crouched to study the prints that led beyond the shelter toward a narrow footbridge over a marshy creek. "We have units checking the road," Harris said. "But if she crossed there, she may be headed toward the old mission chapel." Ethan knew the place. A little white building set back from the highway, open 3 mornings a week for food donations, coffee, and prayer. He had driven past it 100 times and never once gone inside. Shadow was already looking in that direction. The dog's amber eyes were softer now, less urgent, almost sorrowful. Ethan followed Harris across the footbridge, the boards creaking beneath their boots, reeds whispering below. The chapel appeared through the pines, white paint peeling, steeple small against the brightening sky. On the steps, curled beneath a gray blanket from the donation bin, sat a young woman with fair skin, light brown hair tangled beneath a hood, and eyes fixed on nothing. She looked up when Shadow stopped at the bottom step. Not afraid, not surprised, broken open. Ethan held both hands where she could see them. "Hannah," he said softly. Her lips trembled. "Is my baby alive?" The question was so small it seemed to kneel before them. Ethan felt the whole morning gather in his chest. Shadow stepped one careful paw onto the bottom stair and sat, as if standing guard over her too. "Yes," Ethan said. "Noah is alive." Hannah covered her mouth, and the sound that left her was not relief alone. It was grief, shame, exhaustion, and a love that had never left, even when hope had. The chapel bell above them stirred in the wind, giving one faint, accidental note. Harris lowered his radio and spoke gently into it, asking for medical support, not backup, not force. Ethan stayed where he was, close enough to be heard, far enough to let her breathe. Shadow looked from Hannah to Ethan, then toward the road where Noah had gone, holding all 3 of them in a silence that felt less like judgment than mercy. The morning sun climbed higher, spilling pale gold across the chapel steps and the damp forest beyond. Hannah held herself tightly beneath the gray blanket, hands pressed over her mouth, eyes wide and unsteady. Ethan remained still, letting the space between them stretch, letting her draw the first breath of trust back into herself. Shadow sat near the foot of the steps, chest rising and falling in calm rhythm, ears flicking toward the smallest sounds, the rustle of leaves, a bird stirring, the faint hum of traffic on the distant county road. Every so often, the shepherd glanced up at Ethan, amber eyes conveying a message without words. Watch. Protect. Understand. Ethan nodded once, a subtle motion, and kept his gaze gentle, letting the tension ease without dissolving the alertness necessary in a place that had begun as uncertainty and might yet return to it. The wind shifted, carrying with it the damp scent of pine needles and wet earth, teasing the strands of Hannah's hair against her forehead. The baby, now quiet in the ambulance-warmed blanket, had fallen into a light doze during the transfer, and Ethan could feel the small rise and fall of each breath against his jacket. He crouched slightly, letting the infant rest safely in the soft curve of his forearm while keeping one hand free to steady himself against the uneven step. Shadow leaned forward, nose twitching over the blanket, ensuring that every movement in the vicinity remained safe and non-threatening. Ethan's eyes traced the horizon beyond the chapel, noting the open field where fog still lingered in shallow pockets, the gnarled branches of loblolly pines swaying slightly, their shadows elongated and pale. The sheriff's cruiser and paramedic vehicle idled a short distance away, their presence unobtrusive yet steady, a reminder that help was here, tangible and ready. Deputy Harris approached, voice low, respectful of the quiet that had settled. "Captain, we will need to document the scene, verify the child's identity, and ensure the mother is medically and emotionally supported," he said, clipboard held loosely in one hand, eyes scanning the steps where Hannah sat. Ethan nodded, aware of the balance between procedure and humanity. "I understand. Keep her calm. Let me do the talking if needed." Harris gave a small, approving nod and stepped back slightly, letting Ethan maintain a line of sight and emotional connection with Hannah while still observing from the periphery. Shadow shifted to a sit beside Ethan's knee, tail curled neatly around his paws, eyes never leaving the mother or the blanket containing her child. The dog's presence radiated reassurance, a living testament to safety, vigilance, and unspoken loyalty. Ethan exhaled slowly, feeling the morning air fill his lungs, mingling with the lingering scent of wet pine and the faint tang of dew-covered grass. He spoke gently, voice steady but soft. "Hannah, I know this is overwhelming. The baby is safe, warm, and under care. You are not alone." She lifted her eyes to meet his, a mixture of fear, relief, and raw exhaustion swimming in the pale blue of her irises. A shaky exhale slipped past her lips, a sound that was more surrender than speech. Ethan remained on his knees, letting silence be part of the conversation, allowing trust to form in pauses and glances, in the soft hum of the ambulance heater and the light breath of Shadow at his side. Minutes passed, or perhaps it was only seconds stretched by attention and hope. The baby stirred slightly, eyelids fluttering, tiny fingers curling toward the edge of the blanket. Shadow lowered his head, nudging the infant gently with his nose, as if to check on the warmth and pulse of life in the smallest human Ethan had ever held in his arms. Hannah's lips trembled again, forming the word yes, unsteady, whispered, barely audible. Ethan's chest constricted in response, and he offered a faint, encouraging nod. "Yes," he said. "Yes, he is here. He is safe." The fog continued to lift across the field, sunlight piercing through gaps in the pines, painting the wet grass in muted gold. The stillness of the chapel and the surrounding forest became an ally, a quiet shield against the intensity of the emotions that hovered over the trio. Ethan shifted slightly to make sure his weight did not disturb the infant, keeping the baby nestled against his chest, still wrapped in warmth, and adjusted Shadow's position subtly, keeping him oriented toward both mother and child, a sentinel and companion. From somewhere behind the chapel, the faint murmur of other responders moved closer, careful not to intrude on the delicate balance of trust, recovery, and relief that hung like morning mist. Ethan let the moment stretch, understanding that in this suspended space between fear and safety, every breath, glance, and stillness mattered. Shadow rested his muzzle against Ethan's boot, ears flicking only occasionally, attuned to every sound in the waking morning. Hannah's shoulders, initially rigid and protective, softened imperceptibly as she allowed herself to follow the child's gentle movements, and Ethan's voice continued in low, calm reassurance. The sun climbed higher, the fog retreating further, and the rail yard, now visible beyond the chapel, seemed less threatening, transformed in the light to a quiet field of potential, of possibilities, where a child, a mother, a Marine, and a German shepherd had converged in fragile trust, poised at the edge of a new beginning, each one holding the other in ways words could never fully capture. Hannah's first step down from the chapel porch looked like it cost her everything she had left. Deputy Harris did not rush her. Melissa Grant stood near the open ambulance with a blanket folded over one arm and a calmness that seemed practiced by years of walking toward frightened people without making them feel chased. Ethan remained where he was, holding Noah close enough for the baby's warmth to reach through the fabric of his shirt, while Shadow stood at his left side like a quiet promise. The German shepherd did not pull forward. He did not bark. He only watched Hannah with eyes so steady that the young woman seemed to find courage in them before she found it in herself. Her sneakers touched the damp grass at the bottom of the steps. She stopped there, pale and trembling, her fingers gripping the edges of the gray blanket around her shoulders. "I thought someone would find him faster," she whispered. The words were thin, nearly lost under the breeze moving through the pines. Ethan heard them anyway. "Shadow did," he said gently. Hannah looked at the dog, and her face folded under the weight of relief and shame. "I heard him barking once, before I left the yard," she said. "I thought he was warning me away. But he stayed with Noah, did he not?" Ethan lowered his gaze to Shadow. The dog's ears softened. "He stayed." Hannah pressed one hand against her chest, as if holding herself together from the inside. "I did not want to leave him. I just needed someone to see him. I needed him to have a chance." Melissa moved closer, slow as morning light. "Hannah, you need care too. We can help you get warm. We can take you to the hospital with him." Hannah's eyes lifted sharply toward Noah. For one instant, fear returned, raw and immediate. "Will they take him away from me?" No one answered too quickly. That mattered. Ethan had learned that false comfort could be another kind of harm. Deputy Harris removed his hat, his silver hair catching the sun. "Our first concern is safety," he said. "His safety and yours. There will be people who ask questions. There will be steps. But you are here, and you are asking about your child, and that matters." Hannah swallowed, looking at Noah's tiny face tucked beneath the blanket. His eyes were half open now, unfocused and calm, his small mouth moving in sleepy motions. Ethan took one step closer, just enough for her to see him clearly. "He knows your voice," he said. "Talk to him." Hannah shook her head once, afraid of her own longing. "I do not deserve to." The sentence landed harder than any cry. Ethan felt Shadow lean against his leg. For a moment, the old ache inside him answered hers, the part of him that knew what it meant to believe one mistake could erase every good thing left in a person. He looked at Hannah, not as a Marine giving an order, but as one wounded soul speaking to another. "Love does not become false because it got scared," he said, "and mercy does not wait until we deserve it." The chapel bell moved again in the wind, one soft note above them, small and bright. Hannah closed her eyes. When she opened them, she stepped forward. Melissa remained beside her, ready but not crowding. Ethan carefully adjusted Noah in his arms and lowered him just enough for Hannah to see him without forcing her to take him before she was steady. The baby heard her breathing. His tiny brow moved. Hannah bent closer, tears sliding silently down her cheeks. "Noah," she whispered. The child stirred. Not much, just a small turn of the head toward the sound that had known him before any other. Hannah covered her mouth, and the whole clearing seemed to still around that tiny recognition. Shadow sat down then, right between Ethan and the ambulance, as if he had decided the moment was safe enough to rest, but too holy to abandon. Melissa smiled through wet eyes and unfolded the blanket around Hannah's shoulders more securely. "Come with us," she said. "Both of you can be checked. You can ride near him." Hannah looked at Ethan. "You are not angry." Ethan thought of the rail yard, the note, the blue blanket, the way despair could bend a person until a terrible choice looked like the only door left. He thought of Noah's hand brushing Shadow's muzzle, of the dog closing his eyes as if receiving a prayer. "I am grateful we found you," he said. It was not forgiveness pronounced from above. It was something quieter. A hand extended across the gap. Hannah nodded, but as Melissa guided her toward the ambulance, her knees weakened. Ethan moved instinctively, not grabbing, only stepping close enough for her to steady herself against his forearm. Shadow rose at once, careful and alert. Hannah caught her balance and whispered, "Thank you." Ethan did not say anything. Some words were too small for what had happened. At the ambulance, Melissa helped Hannah sit on the side bench, then placed Noah safely in her arms under close supervision. The moment the baby settled against her, his crying stopped completely. Hannah stared down at him, stunned by the quiet. She touched his cheek with one finger, so lightly it barely moved the skin. "I am sorry," she whispered. "I am so sorry." Noah answered with a small sigh. It was nothing, medically, just breath. But everyone there heard it like a door opening. Shadow stepped to the ambulance threshold and rested his chin on the edge, watching mother and child together. Hannah looked at him through her tears. "You guarded him when I could not." The shepherd blinked slowly, calm as dawn. Ethan placed a hand on Shadow's back and felt the strong, living warmth beneath his palm. Beyond them, the sun finally cleared the trees, pouring light over the chapel roof, the wet grass, the old road, and the faces gathered there. No one called it a miracle out loud. They did not need to. It was there in the silence, breathing. The ambulance doors remained open for a few moments longer than necessary, as if even the morning did not want to interrupt what had finally become whole. Hannah sat on the side bench with Noah wrapped safely in her arms, the silver blanket glowing in the sunlight like a small piece of dawn. Melissa Grant checked the baby's pulse again, then Hannah's, speaking in a low, practical voice that made care feel less like procedure and more like shelter. Deputy Harris stood near the rear of the ambulance, radio clipped to his shoulder, hat in his hands, giving updates with the gentleness of a man who understood that not every emergency ended when help arrived. Ethan stood beside Shadow at the edge of the gravel, close enough to see Noah's tiny fingers curled against his mother's sweatshirt, far enough to give them the dignity of space. Shadow did not understand paperwork, court forms, hospital protocols, or the long road that would come after rescue. But he understood breathing. He understood warmth. He understood that the child he had guarded was now held against the heartbeat he had been searching for without knowing its name. The German shepherd lowered himself slowly onto the grass, resting his chin on his paws, eyes still fixed on the ambulance. Ethan watched him and felt the strange exhaustion that comes after purpose. It did not feel like victory. Victory was too loud a word for this. It felt like grace after a long night, quiet, undeserved, and fragile enough that everyone moved softly around it. Hannah looked up from Noah and found Ethan's face. Her own face had changed in the space of minutes. She still looked tired, still pale, still marked by fear, but something inside her had returned to its rightful place. Not peace, not yet, but presence. "Captain Walker," she said, his name careful in her mouth. "I wrote that note because I thought if I stayed, I would ruin his life." Ethan took a slow breath. The pines moved behind the chapel, their branches whispering against the brightening sky. "I do not think a person standing in pain can always see the whole road," he said. Hannah looked down at Noah. "I asked for help before. I did. I filled out forms. I waited in offices. People were kind, but everything took time, and time felt bigger than I was." Melissa's hands stilled for a second, not because she was surprised, but because she knew this kind of sentence. Many people did. A sentence from the edge of systems, from the space between need and answer. Deputy Harris lowered his gaze. Ethan stepped closer, his boots sinking slightly into the damp grass. "Then today the answer came late," he said. "But it came." Hannah turned toward Shadow. "Because of him." The dog lifted his head at the sound of her voice. His ears pricked, and for the first time since the rail yard, his tail moved once against the grass. Small, measured, enough. Hannah gave a broken little smile through fresh tears. "He looked at me like he knew I was not trying to stop loving him." Ethan looked at Shadow and remembered the first day the shepherd had been assigned to him years ago, all muscle and suspicion, refusing treats from strangers, refusing comfort until trust was earned. Shadow had never been impressed by rank, noise, or fear. He read what sat beneath them. Maybe that was why he had stayed with Noah. Maybe that was why he had led them to Hannah. Not because he understood the details, but because he knew the scent of love buried under despair. A second paramedic arrived with a warm pack and a cup of water. Hannah accepted it with shaking hands. Noah slept now, his face turned inward, one cheek against his mother's chest. The sight pulled a silence over them again. No one wanted to disturb the small rhythm of that sleep. The hospital would come next. Questions would come next. A social worker named Denise Caldwell was already on the way, Deputy Harris said, a woman known for finding safe places without making people feel punished for needing them. There would be evaluations, support planning, temporary oversight, and hard conversations. None of it would be simple. Miracles rarely erased the work. They only made the work worth doing. Ethan understood that better than most. Healing had not returned him from war in one bright flash. It had come in pieces. A dog beside the bed. A morning without shaking hands. A drive down a quiet road. A cry in the fog. Hannah touched Noah's tiny hand and looked at Ethan again. "Will I see Shadow again?" The question surprised him. Shadow stood at his name, as if answering before Ethan could. Melissa smiled softly from inside the ambulance. Even Deputy Harris looked away for a moment, pretending to study the tree line. Ethan rested his hand on the shepherd's back. "I think he would insist on it," he said. Hannah's smile trembled, then held. The ambulance finally prepared to leave. This time, when the doors began to close, Shadow did not strain after them. He stood tall beside Ethan, watchful but calm, as if he had accepted that the child was no longer disappearing into danger, only traveling toward care. Through the rear window, Hannah lifted Noah's tiny hand in a faint goodbye. Shadow's tail moved once more. The vehicle pulled away from the chapel, slow and careful, red lights silent now in the clear morning. Ethan and Shadow watched until it turned onto the county road and vanished beyond the pines. Deputy Harris came to stand beside them. For a while, neither man spoke. The chapel bell stirred again, one small note carried by the wind. Harris finally said, "Most people would have driven past that fence." Ethan looked down at Shadow. The shepherd's amber eyes were turned toward the road, soft and steady. I almost did, Ethan said. Harris nodded, understanding more than the words offered. Ethan opened the passenger door of the pickup, and Shadow climbed in with the slow dignity of a soldier after watch. Before Ethan got behind the wheel, he looked back at the chapel steps, the damp grass, the old road, and the patch of sunlight where Hannah had first heard that her son was alive. The world had not changed everywhere. It was still hard, still full of people waiting too long for help. But in one small place outside Wilmington, North Carolina, a child was warm, a mother had been found, and a dog had guarded the narrow bridge between despair and mercy. Ethan started the engine. Shadow rested his head against the window, eyes half closed as the sun spilled over his muzzle. They followed the road toward the hospital, not rushing, not chasing, simply staying near the miracle long enough to make sure it had room to live. By the time Ethan and Shadow reached New Hanover Regional Medical Center, the morning had brightened into a clear Carolina blue, the kind of sky that made the world look cleaner than it had any right to be. The hospital stood busy and glass-fronted, alive with automatic doors, rolling wheelchairs, ringing phones, and the soft hurry of people carrying other people's fear. Ethan parked near the emergency entrance and sat for a moment with both hands resting on the wheel. Shadow waited beside him, calm but alert, his amber eyes tracking every movement beyond the windshield. "We stay quiet," Ethan said. "We do not get in the way." Shadow gave one slow blink, as if he understood that this mission had changed shape. It was no longer about finding. It was about staying close without taking over. Inside, the air smelled of antiseptic, coffee, warm plastic, and rain still drying from people's coats. A security officer recognized Deputy Harris's call ahead and guided Ethan to a small family waiting room off the pediatric wing, where the lights were softer and the walls were painted with sea turtles and blue waves. Shadow was allowed in after a quick conversation, his retired service vest clipped across his shoulders, his posture so controlled that even the nurses seemed to lower their voices around him. Ethan stood near the doorway, watching through a glass panel as Noah lay in a hospital bassinet beneath a warming lamp, wrapped in a clean white blanket with a tiny blue cap on his head. His cheeks held more color now. His breathing looked peaceful. Beside him, Hannah sat in a chair with a blanket over her shoulders, speaking to a woman in a navy cardigan who introduced herself as Denise Caldwell from Child and Family Services. Denise did not carry herself like a judge. She had soft gray eyes, dark skin, and a voice that moved slowly enough for broken people to follow. Melissa Grant stood nearby, offering a cup of water, while a pediatric nurse adjusted Noah's blanket with careful hands. Ethan could not hear every word through the glass, but he could read the room. Not easy, not simple, but safe. Hannah looked smaller under the hospital lights, yet steadier than she had at the chapel. Every few seconds, her eyes returned to Noah, as if she needed proof again and again that he was still there. Shadow made a faint sound beside Ethan, not a whine, not quite. Ethan glanced down. The dog's gaze was fixed on the bassinet. "I know," Ethan murmured. "He is okay." A nurse opened the door a few minutes later and smiled gently. "Captain Walker?" She asked if you and Shadow could come in for a moment. Ethan felt something in his chest tighten. He entered slowly, Shadow at heel, his paws silent on the polished floor. Hannah looked up when they came in. Her eyes were red, but no longer lost. "They said Noah is doing better," she said, voice fragile but clear. "The doctor said he is strong." Ethan looked at the baby under the warming lamp. Noah slept with one hand outside the blanket, fingers open as though reaching for light. "He has been strong all morning," Ethan said. Hannah nodded, then looked at Shadow. "And he has too." Shadow stepped forward only after Ethan gave a quiet command. He stopped beside the bassinet and lifted his nose just high enough to smell the baby's blanket. Noah stirred. His tiny fingers curled once, and the room fell silent in that instant, not because anything dramatic happened, but because everyone there knew what it had taken for that small movement to exist. Hannah reached out and rested her hand lightly on Shadow's head. The German shepherd stood still beneath her touch, accepting it as if he had been waiting for her to forgive herself through him. "I thought I was asking the world to take him away," Hannah whispered. "But maybe I was asking God to send someone who would bring us both back." No one answered. Denise looked down at her folder. Melissa wiped one corner of her eye with the back of her wrist. Ethan kept his hand on Shadow's vest and let the silence carry what words might bruise. Later, after doctors finished their checks and Denise explained the first careful steps of a safety plan, Hannah was allowed to hold Noah again under supervision. She settled into the chair by the window, and the baby rested against her chest, warm, fed, alive. Outside, traffic moved along South 17th Street. Somewhere in the distance, a helicopter crossed the sky, its sound fading toward the coast. Shadow lay at Hannah's feet, not asleep, not off duty, simply present. Ethan stood by the window, looking at the sunlight on the hospital glass, thinking of the rail yard, the fog, the note held down by a white stone, the little bear with mud on one paw. He understood then that a miracle was not always the moment a life was saved. Sometimes it was what came after. The paperwork, the therapy appointments, the temporary housing, the meals delivered, the stranger who stayed, the dog who remembered a scent and refused to let mercy pass by. Hannah looked toward Ethan, Noah sleeping against her. "Why did you take that road this morning?" she asked. Ethan looked down at Shadow, whose ears flicked at the sound of his name though no one had spoken it. "I thought I needed quiet," he said. Maybe quiet was just the only way I could hear him. Hannah held Noah closer and nodded. The room grew still, warmed by the noon sun. Not perfect, not finished, but alive. And in that small hospital room, with a mother breathing easier, a child sleeping safely, and a German shepherd guarding the space between sorrow and hope, Ethan finally understood that some missions do not arrive with orders. They arrive as a cry in the fog, and they ask only whether your heart is still willing to answer.